Guys, Ray from Apple Valley Astrologer. So, as some of you may know that are following me on my personal Facebook page, I have been doing some research on Lilith, and I've been really starting to hone in on that study of the archetype of Lilith. Those who aren't familiar with the archetype of Lilith in astrology, she does take on a facet of the mythological Lilith, or the mythological character of Lilith. So she is supposed to be the provocative one, the rebel, the succubus, the temptress, and the devil on your shoulder, in a sense. And I've been really trying. A lot of other components of astrology, especially the evolutionary astrology, has been a struggle for me to think out and then also accept other things that astrologers have contributed to the theology. And I obviously produce information and methods in a similar fashion, where it takes progress. The thing that I find interesting and kind of weird, I've honestly only been consciously messing with the idea of Lilith for consistently now, for a couple days. And in other instances, it's taken me years, months even, to kind of come to conclusions of things that make sense. And for some reason, the Lilith thing almost came instantaneously, which I find very odd. Normally I would just, go, oh, well, that's just a weird coincidence and whatever, but I have had past experiences where I've had similar situations where it almost just came instantaneously. And I'm not talking about like in a theology or philosophy or astrology sense. Just in my life, I came to an epiphany or a conclusion or something like that, and I had been completely on point. So theoretically, I'm leaning more towards that this is falling into the same kind of concept as that. And before I just start jumping to conclusions and thinking that I am somehow a physical manifestation to channel the Lilith, like I'm the Lilith translator or anything, I've gone through my chart and I've been trying to prove or disprove that kind of mentality. So the things that I do know, that I've looked at my own chart, thanks to Alyssa Sharp, I guess, I actually have recently studied Draconic Astrology. And that's supposed to be, the context itself is completely interpreted differently than a standard natal chart, but the wheel still looks the same, and also essentially it's supposed to be the karmatic or soul blueprint, your true node's blueprint. So the entity behind the mask being the physical manifestation in this life, the ascendant. So basically the person controlling the robot, the computer on the inside, that the Draconic chart is supposed to represent that. So funny enough, I was a bit confused when I tried to use my chart as an example, because that's usually the first thing I do when I'm trying to understand, comprehend some sort of new interpretation method. Because I have, I believe it's either 1 degree or 2 degree of Aries true node. And so if anybody knows anything about Draconic Astrology, if you don't actually have a video on that, you can go to Intro to Draconic Astrology. It's RE, Intro to Draconic Astrology with Alyssa Sharp, because I made a response video to her intro video. But that explains the basics of Draconic Astrology. So I was initially confused because my chart looked almost exactly the same as my Draconic Astrology chart. So I was like, wait a minute, I must be missing something, or I didn't, input it into my software right, or I don't know. So I look at it more. And the reason why, also, if you look at my part 2 of my Ascendant Rising, I actually use my chart as an example to describe the core characteristics of a natal chart. And some of the descriptions I use is Maverick and just some really antisocial personality disorder kind of characteristics, which is, funny enough, validated through a psychiatric analysis that I've had. So before I even anybody starts thinking like, oh, well, she's just making up that she has APD. No, I was clinically diagnosed with it when I hit my 3rd base for my Saturn return, which, as I've mentioned that before too, and that's the waxing square approaching your Saturn return is actually one of the most gnarly things, essentially, as opposed to the Saturn return itself. It's like your pre-test to your test that is your Saturn return, if you get what I'm saying. So basically what I'm getting at is that the ascendant that I am right now is essentially a copy of my soul archetype, almost to the exact signs. So the only difference really is that obviously the ascendant is different, and I've been doing some ascendant videos recently, and every time I do a video or I focus on a lecture or something like that, I obviously, being obsessive, the first thing I do is I go back and I pretend like my own chart is like somebody's new chart that I've never seen, and I walk through the steps that I normally would and see if there's anything that I come across that is new to me, because I know that this is kind of just a critical thinking process, but defining my Ascendant Rising 5 years ago, I'll have a completely different kind of perception now. So I always think it's important to review on things. And I understood that I had the Jekyll and Hyde personality with the Gemini Ascendant, but the whole two sides of the same coin. So essentially, a Gemini Ascendant, if they're aware, if they become self-aware, which is supposed to be the higher vibration of that Ascendant sign, then they essentially have all the characteristics of dissociative personality disorder, but they know about the other personalities. And so if you're not familiar with psychological terminology, dissociative personality disorder is what they used to use the term multiple personality disorder. It's not bipolar, where, the chemical imbalance shoots them one way and then shoots them the other. And it's not schizophrenia, where they have, like, hallucination ideology. That's when there's this one movie that's really cool. It's called, like, Session 9 or something, I think. I'm not sure if I have that right, but something like that, where it's some horror movie where they're killing people, and it ends up somebody having multiple personality disorder, and they are finding like some sort of psychiatric tape footage, like recording of therapy sessions of a little girl who has like 3 different personalities, and the doctor can put her under hypnosis and ask one of them individually to come out and manifest, and they had all completely different personalities. Like, one was the princess, and one was like some generic name, like Cody or something like that, that was the one that likes to hurt people. And essentially, obviously, that girl in that movie didn't know about her other personalities per se. She understood that those characters existed within her, but she actually either believed or knew that they were separate people. And she was afraid of one. And then she tried to get the other one to stick up for her. That sort of thing, where there's actual different physical entities within a person. So that's kind of like what the Gemini Ascendant has, except for the difference between somebody with the clinical traditional diagnosis of multiple personality disorder and a Gemini Ascendant is that the Gemini Ascendant knows that they have a twin or they have an ulterior personality, and they're aware of it. They don't necessarily contribute to it, but they can see it and they can observe it. And that's also why a lot of Gemini ascendants and Geminis in general have double lives, or end up having two different kinds of scenarios going on at the same time. And it's not because they're being trifling little bitches, which most people think that's what it is. It's actually because they have a split within them. And basically their challenge through life is supposed to be an integration of the two. You're supposed to merge the two together, just like you merge with Source once you get towards the end of your life cycle. And I have a lot of planets, and you can see again in that Ascendant Rising intro part 2 video. I have a lot of planets in my candidate houses. Candidate is supposed to represent the past, so cardinal are the angular houses, and that's supposed to represent the future. And then the succedent houses. Okay, no, sorry, got that mixed up. So the angular houses are supposed to represent now. The succeedent houses are supposed to represent the future. And then the candidate houses are supposed to represent the past. People who have a lot of planets in the past houses usually make good historians, are fixated on past stuff, have problems letting things go and evolving, etc., etc. People that are in have a lot of planets, especially personal planets, in the succeedent houses, those are the people that are born before their time, contribute all kinds of evolutionary concepts to the world. They are the pioneers of invention. They're essentially the Aquarius archetype personified. Not the Aquarius traumatic side, but the Aquarius inventor sort of scientific side. So, and then obviously the angular houses are the present time, which is why those 4 houses are part of the core personality. So, not only do I have quite a few planets in the candidate houses, they all are sextiling. They're all in positive aspects to each other, or what is considered positive aspects. And it's all of my generational planets, or my psychic planets, or my religious planets that are in those houses. So essentially, the more I learn about the past, and now that I've obviously been introduced for quite some time to the concept of synchronicity, I learn about the past, and it makes me understand the present better. Sounds really weird. It's like the God phone complex, but backwards, which I find really weird. So essentially, the reason why I understand the karmatic Lilith as well as I do is because I not only am pretty much the most uncreative incarnate ever, so essentially I'm walking around and I'm the blueprint of my soul, which is why I don't conform, and I'm very unconventional, and I go against everything that a normal human being would usually succumb to. And so the whole channeling between my psyche and my Neptune soul archetype, there's actually a sextile between those. And so they're not even just, having a God phone complex. They're like in the same room and they're best buddies and they're in cahoots together and they tell each other all kinds of shit. So I feel like I almost have a negative kind of thought process, and I always think the worst of people because I'm projecting the fact that somewhere deep down I know Lilith inside and out, and I know and see the Lilith in everyone, because I always am really good about picking out the most horrible things in people, because every single person has a Lilith. Every single person is guilty of succumbing to their Lilith in one way, shape, or form. Some people are resilient and they rise above it and they become a higher vibration to where they either avoid the triggers of their Lilith, or they find a way to cope with it and not act out on it. And those are the people that are the closest to being godly, which is also, I think, what Satanism is getting at. I think that they are grazing the surface of being your own god thing. I think it's turned into, grazing the surface has turned into a narcissistic complex, and of course I'm projecting, but of course, again, people know how that works. But I think when it says be your own god, you don't need God to do that, that God is within you. Yes, and the reason why Satanists emulate some sort of success or try to instill some sort of guidelines to make you successful is to translate that concept that you're supposed to rise above Lilith's stronghold on you. So, like I said, when the Bible says that everybody commits sin and everybody shall be forgiven, when it says that everybody shall be forgiven, but then in the same token, it's in the Old Testament, it says that sinners go to hell. Everybody goes to hell in some way, shape, or form in the next incarnation, because the whole point of evolutionary astrology is for your karmatic soul to actually go on a journey to learn everything from every perspective, because there never is a concrete right or wrong answer or solution to something. Perception and perspective give all kinds of different options to creative solution. And in order to understand the problem, and i.e. understand all the potential solutions to said problem, you have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the other person that could potentially contribute to the creative solution. So in order to do that, you're going to have to play the part of quite a few people, which is essentially what the whole incarnation factor is all about. So when I say that somebody can experience hell but then be forgiven at the same time, is going back to the aspects of the chart. Everybody's forgiven, and they're given a second chance on life. They're given eternal life, because we're always recycling the energy, because even in quantum physics and science, they have proven that energy cannot just dissipate. Like the phenomenon that's been created with antimatter. They've made the antimatter, but now they're kind of freaking out because they don't know what to do with it, because you can't just make the antimatter and then make the antimatter go away without some sort of causation going on, i.e. a huge explosion of light or force would have to happen once it hits actual out of its whatever containment. I'm not super into science, obviously, so don't quote me, but people who know what I'm talking about get what I'm saying. And so if energy has to dissipate and be recycled, and it's been proven that we have electromagnetic currents within us, and even that we have some sort of neuron connectors going on in our brain, even within like 5 or 10 minutes, I'm not totally sure on the exact time, after we're dead, after we die. And then if you talk to anybody who's into parapsychology, or anybody who has experienced paranormal entities, or any kind of experiences like that, which I obviously am personally, I've had my own personal experiences with that, it's pretty much impossible to argue that there isn't some sort of energy force, or the computer, the hard drive within, can just disappear. I believe it was Robert Hand. He's one of the main contributing astrologers to Astro.com. Essentially, I don't know if he actually started Astro.com, but he might as well have. He said something in a lecture at one point where he says, so if essentially our souls are like hard drives, or the memory in a hard drive, when you turn off the computer, where does the memory in the hard drive go? Does it stay within it, or does it just dissipate into something else? That's, the whole concept with that. And if you were to dissect and take apart the computer components, and you took the hard drive out, even though the computer no longer functions and exists as one physical system, does that mean that the hard drive no longer is valid or has some sort of form of existence? or anything? Essentially, no, because obviously you can hold the hard drive in your hand. The computer can be no more, but you could put that hard drive into something else, and it could live on. And essentially, most of the time, it gets wiped out. But the same thing with computers, I think happens with people, is that if you put in the right codes and you dig in just the right way, you can retrieve files that have been erased from hard drives. And I think that's essentially retrieving those files from an erased hard drive is what people do when they start to explore their Neptune, their nodes, and their moon, their emotion, their spirit. So, again, I can't remember if I actually got to my whole point. So the point is that how you can be forgiven is that you will continue to reincarnate into something new every life. But the way that you can be forgiven and still go to hell is the fact that what Lilith you will be born with, aka what Lilith is in your natal chart. And there are some really gnarly ones. I've really been sitting on this, and I've been thinking about it, and then I also did my usual referencing a couple of other astrologer notes about Lilith. And after going over all those, adding my own 2 cents, and thanks to my boyfriend collaborating with him, I have actually simplified down the karmatic archetypes of Lilith. Essentially, the sins of your past life. And when somebody says, why me? Why does this always happen to me? I'm a good person. I've never killed anybody. I've never done anything like that. I was never a horrible person. Why do all these things happen to me? And even some people go like, why am I depressed? I haven't done anything. You know, I have everything in life. How come I'm sad? Or some people even go like, why did she have to die? She was 2. What? Who did that? And people rationalize that God needs you. Yeah, more or less, I guess, in a way. But if you think about it this way, if that child that died when they were 2 in their past life was a mother that had like Munchausen syndrome, which is essentially making their children sick and killing them, their hell, even though they were forgiven by being reincarnated, their hell could actually be them coming back and suffering and dying early in life to essentially cut off any of their potential of being anything or evolving throughout this life. So it's essentially like wasting a life in a video game when you've been continuously going on and on throughout some sort of chapter of the game, and you're just so frustrated that you had to go all the way back to the beginning, and one of the very first obstacles in the beginning that was so easy before, you sit there and accidentally fuck up and die right there, and you wasted that life, and say that life is your last one for quite some time. You know how pissed you are? Yeah. You didn't get anywhere? You didn't move on? You already know something way beyond that, but now you're going to have to go back to go without collecting $200. You see what I'm saying? So that's what I'm getting at. But, so, anyway, this is my intro video to this, and I'm just going to sit on this for a minute, and I got errands to run, and then I'll go ahead and discuss the actual archetypes. And to be warned, I also didn't include it in this video because they are going to be gruesome. They are going to be frank, and some people may not be ready for it and may not want to hear it. Granted, people that aren't ready to hear it, if they do watch it, they'll just say that I'm crazy and that I don't know what I'm talking about, which is completely fine. I mean, I expect it anyway. I'm starting to understand, because I have a similar chart signature to Nostradamus. I totally understand why he kept his shit to himself and why he didn't want to say anything. Granted, not taking into account the cultural phenomenon at the time, where if you were caught doing what he was doing, you're a heretic and they would kill you. But even beyond that, he was hesitant to tell people about the things that he knew and the things that were going on that he was doing because of the dishonorable criticism that he would get. Because people would have called him crazy. And still, 500 years later, people still call him crazy. And people will continue to call me crazy. And you know the difference between him and me? I don't give a fuck. So, yeah. Anyway, this is part 1. Part 2 will be soon. Ish.